Welcome to this explainer. All right, let's just dive right into this. If you're like most professionals, just hearing the phrase project management probably makes you tense up a little bit. It brings up this universal struggle we all face: creeping deadlines, totally overwhelming stress, and that constant nagging fear that something absolutely crucial is slipping through the cracks. And it doesn't even matter if you're engineering a massive new software system, building a house, or honestly, just trying to coordinate a huge weekend yard cleanup. Managing a project usually feels a lot like wrestling with pure chaos. But, and here's the good news, it absolutely doesn't have to be that way.
I want to share a quote from Dr. J.M. Duran that completely nails this. He said, "A project is a problem scheduled for solution." I just love that phrasing. It takes the whole concept of project management and totally flips it. It's no longer this heavy, boring administrative burden. Instead, it's just a structured approach to problem solving. We have a problem and we're simply putting it on a schedule to fix it. Beautifully simple, right?
But okay, that brings up a pretty vital question. If it's so simple, why do these scheduled solutions so often end in total failure, blown budgets, and teams just pointing fingers at each other? Well, when you look at the research, the absolute leading causes of project failures boil down to two things: inaccurate estimates and forgotten work. People either literally forget a massive piece of the puzzle, or they completely misjudge how long it's going to take and what it's going to cost.
So how do we actually fix this? Well, here's our agenda, which is kind of our very own project plan for this explainer. We're going to cover why projects fail, breaking down the work, the scheduling trap, mapping the critical path, and finally, wrap up with some absolutely golden rules of planning.
Moving right along to Section 1, breaking down the work. Basically, what actually must be done. You see, before we can even think about making a schedule, we have to know exactly what needs doing. Enter the ultimate antidote to forgotten work: the work breakdown structure, or WBS for short. Simply put, this is the process of taking a complicated task and subdividing it into smaller and smaller pieces until you hit a level that just can't be broken down anymore. Now, why go through all this trouble? Because it is so much easier to estimate the time and cost for one tiny specific task than it is to look at some massive, overarching project and try to guess the whole thing. If we skip this step, critical work gets forgotten, and honestly, the project is basically doomed right out of the gate.
What's really fascinating here is how this big corporate concept maps perfectly onto something totally everyday, like cleaning a room. You don't just clean the room, right? That's way too broad. You break it down. You pick up clothes, wash walls, dust, vacuum. And actually, even vacuum carpets breaks down further. You have to get the vacuum out of the closet, connect the hose, push it around, and empty the bag. Suddenly, estimating the time it takes to connect the hose is a total breeze compared to estimating how long it takes to clean the room.
And the brilliant thing is, this universally scales. It works for basic chores, but it scales all the way up to the highest levels of engineering. You can apply it to building a house or scale it way up to a massive commercial airplane program. Think about it. When building a plane, the engine, the wings, the avionics, those are all huge projects in their own right. The WBS is the exact thing that ensures everything actually integrates. Because if the wing team and the engine team aren't totally coordinated through a WBS, you could literally end up with an engine that physically does not fit on the wing. No way around it. You need that structure.
But hold on, I need to give you a really stark warning here. A work breakdown structure does not show sequence. I know, it is completely human nature to want to put tasks in chronological order the second we think of them, but you have to resist that urge here. The WBS is strictly for capturing the tasks themselves. If you try to sequence them at this stage, you're just going to bog down the entire process of identifying what actually needs to be done. The sequencing, that comes later.
Which brings us to Section 2, the scheduling trap. Why buying software just isn't enough.
So a lot of people go out, buy some fancy scheduling software, and instantly think, boom, I'm a project manager. But if you don't grasp the underlying methodology, you're basically just setting up a garbage in, garbage out situation. Let's look at the history here. Until around 1958, the go-to tool was the Gantt chart. Those simple horizontal bar charts. Now, don't get me wrong, they are fantastic for communicating basic timeframes to your team. But for a project manager, they have a fatal flaw. They are really poor at showing interdependencies. If one task slips by 2 days, a traditional Gantt chart makes it almost impossible to see how that cascades and impacts tasks down the line. And that is exactly why arrow diagrams, using the critical path method, or PERT, were invented. They explicitly capture how tasks rely on each other. And without getting too bogged down in the software specifics, there are really two main ways to map out those interdependencies. You have activity on node, where the actual work is represented in boxes and arrows show the flow of time. Then you have activity on arrow, where the arrows themselves represent the work being done, and little circles represent the specific events or milestones. Both are completely valid, great ways to figure out your schedule. They just originated from different groups of practitioners back in the day.
All right, Section 3, Mapping the Critical Path. This is how we map the ultimate deadline. We are now in the execution phase, and this is the absolute secret to knowing whether your project can actually hit its imposed deadline. The critical path is defined as the longest path of activities through your project network. It has absolutely zero slack, none. This is vital to understand because any delay, even just one single day on that critical path, means the entire project's completion date slips by a day. So as a manager, this is where your attention needs to be totally laser-focused.
Let's think about this in action using that yard work analogy again. Once we use our WBS to identify every single task, we sequence them logically into phases: preparation, execution, and cleanup. Think about it. Picking up trash, fueling the equipment, and digging out the clippers absolutely have to happen before the actual mowing and trimming can start. By linking these dependencies, we calculate the longest continuous chain of events. That chain right there, that's our critical path, and it dictates the absolute fastest we can possibly finish the yard.
Moving on to Section 4, the Golden Rules of Planning. Time for some actionable advice.
Okay, we've broken down the work, we've mapped the critical path. Now, let's rapid fire through the most actionable golden rules of planning from our source material. First up, schedule what is logically possible before you even worry about who is going to do the work. If you swap that, you'll end up stuck in analysis paralysis. Second rule, keep task durations under 4 to 6 weeks. And actually, if you're doing knowledge work, keep it to just 1 to 3 weeks. Why? Because incredibly long tasks create a false sense of security. People think, oh, I can always make up a day on a 6-month task. That just leads to a really dangerous back-end loading scenario where everyone is rushing at the very end. Third, never plan in more detail than you can actually manage. Keep it practical. And finally, always keep your time increments the same across your plan to avoid any weird logical errors.
And our final section, Section 5, the multitasking myth. Why focus beats scope creep every time.
Now, I can almost hear you saying, but wait, my organization's priorities change constantly. Scope creep is literally everywhere. Well, here's the harsh truth. Changing priorities usually just means an organization is trying to tackle way too much work for the resources they actually have. And scope creep, that almost always happens because something was forgotten early on, meaning not enough time was spent doing that upfront WBS definition. Check out this massive, data-backed punchline from the research. One company found that when they simply stopped forcing people to work on multiple projects simultaneously, their workers' productivity literally doubled, 2 times. Jumping back and forth between projects doesn't make you faster. It completely destroys your focus and your efficiency. Which brings us to a final, slightly provocative thought I want to leave you with today. In your daily work, are you truly managing a scheduled solution, or are you just juggling scope creep? I really challenge you to look at your own daily multitasking. Try taking your biggest headache today and applying a work breakdown structure to it. Find your critical path, stop trying to do absolutely everything at once, and finally take back your time. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you on the next one.